Hey, everybody. Jake McAfee. Welcome to the Fort Wayne Local Podcast. We've got our first in person, in studio interview. Today, I'm here with Jason Arp. Jason, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. I really appreciate this. This is actually the third time we've spoken. You've always been incredibly generous with your time and also very consistent and, articulating your message very well. So I'm going to quickly recap a little bit about who you are, and then we'll kind of jump into your platform and what citizens can expect as you run for mayor. So you were elected in 2015 to the city council representing the 4th district, that's South and Southwest, including Aboit, Times Corners, Waynedale. You grew up in North Carolina, worked for Bank of America in Charlotte, and then as an investment banker in Chicago, working primarily with derivatives and mortgage backed securities. Married with 2 children. Your wife is from this area originally, correct? And then, so you are on the Republican ticket and you have more libertarian views. So that's something I definitely want to get into. Um, so, for people who don't know, can you kind of give us like a quick summary of your platform or what you're looking to bring to the table?
Yeah, I'm hoping that we can put forward a Fort Wayne that empowers Fort Wayne families, where people can make their own decisions on what they want Fort Wayne to look like, as opposed to bureaucrats or there's certain groups that there's like cliques within the town that seem to get to decide where everything goes, and I'd rather empower individual households to be able to make those decisions for themselves, individual businesses to be able to make those decisions for themselves, as opposed to waiting for some collective to decide, hey, we're all going to march this way. Um, I, as you mentioned, I'm pretty libertarian, and I think it's important for families to be able to decide, hey, where do we want to save and invest, and what do we want our community to look like? For some people that might be chickens in their backyard. For other people, it might be, more expanded gardens or something like that, or maybe even a community garden. And they can work within their neighborhoods to decide how that's going to look. But currently, we've got ordinances on the books that prohibits a lot of that sort of thing, and we've seen multiple tax increases, even on the time I've been there, that have taken families' monies, monies that they would have spent on things for themselves or their investments, and it's been put into other people's dreams. And I would like to stop that. I'll let if people want to voluntarily invest in something, hey, knock yourself out. That's great. But to be able to use the power of taxation to take away families' savings to be able to, put it into someone else's building or whatever, that's kind of an anti-American idea. Yet that's kind of the way we've kind of gone as a country. I think is people have allowed politicians and bureaucrats to put themselves in positions where they're the deciders, and a lot of times families are put in a position where, well, we just got to kind of take what they give us.
Hmm. Okay, I love that. I will say for anyone who hasn't listened to our first 2 interviews, please go and do that. I'll link those when I post this. But as a person who was very supportive of a lot of the downtown development, you definitely gave a lot of good counterpoints and got me thinking in a way that I'd never really even thought about. I was just looking at what kind of like
Mhm.
you said, it was happening, it was exciting, and then you brought some good counterpoints about people who maybe have no interest in this. And maybe there's more of those people than you might think. And you're saying they need to have a voice and some options as well.
Right. Yeah. And just being able to decide where they put their own money.
Sure. Okay. And then, so what would be your top priority as mayor if you had to summarize like one key thing that you're going to hang your hat on moving forward? What would be the top priority?
Well, as you mentioned before, we've touched on economic development before in the past. I would try to create an environment that attracts capital, as opposed to specific projects. Just generally creating an environment that attracts capital to improve job creation opportunities, broadly speaking, as opposed to working a deal with this group or that group. So that's one thing that we can do very easily by eliminating business personal property tax. I think we've talked about this
Yeah.
before. This is a tax that they got rid of years ago in Ohio and Michigan, and even longer ago in Illinois, believe it or not. So we're like one of the few states that still has that. And the state has given the counties the option to do away with that tax, basically exempt it for all new investments. And I tried to pull that lever a couple of times on city council over the years. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough support from my colleagues to join me in doing that. But that would level the playing field. Instead of businesses having to come to council and grovel and ask for a tax abatement, we just wouldn't have that tax. So if you wanted to put in your equipment to manufacture something, you could do that without taxes. That's one That's a real simple example, but there's multiple things that we can do like that to encourage business development here. Um, Fort Wayne, if you're not going through specific clicks, it's very difficult to build stuff here. I've had multiple businesses. I have friends in Indianapolis that have tried to expand their business into Fort Wayne. They may have a distribution center in Columbia City, and they say, you know what, it would just make a lot more sense for us to be in Fort Wayne. They buy a pole barn style building. They want to renovate it, put in a nicer bathroom for their employees, and it's just a nightmare trying to get permits, trying to just make the smallest changes. Excuse me. If you're not using the preferred vendors, and so I would like to make it an even playing field, make it easier for people to do this sort of thing. So if people want to invest here and make it a nicer place for their employees, they can without having to be a part of a clique.
And so how would that work if you can elaborate a little bit on so if you're giving up the tax revenue, I'm assuming you've run some sort of projections on how you'd make it up by stimulating the growth. Like I'm assuming you track more businesses and therefore you'd make up the tax revenue that way. Is that
Yeah, so I published a white paper on this in the Indiana Policy Review in 2017, where we took a look at what it is that we collect from business personal property tax now, countywide, because even though the city gets to make the decision, it affects everybody in Allen County. That's just the way the state law is written. And we looked at it, and so if you eliminate that tax, you're doing two things. One, you no longer have to abate it. So almost half of the revenue that we receive from it is abated anyway. So you're just not having to do that tax abatement. So we're not even actually collecting, so there's that. You don't have to do that part of it. And then on the other hand, we do a lot of real estate tax abatement. So like you may have seen recently, there's been several spec buildings
Mhm.
that developers have done, and the city will give a tax abatement for that. Well, instead of doing tax abatements for real estate projects like that, which favor new buildings versus existing building, and you're in real estate,
Mhm.
you know there's lots of vacant industrial space that probably could be renovated or made use in some other way. We're encouraging abandoning those buildings to build nice shiny buildings near the interstate and using, and that's great. I mean, there's a market demand for that sort of thing, but it doesn't require taxpayer money to do it. We
Mhm.
give away a lot of tax incentives for stuff like that. Another example of that is Amazon. The city purchases this land, does a lot of development there, and then when Amazon purchases the property from the prior owner, which the city had given it to, we end up giving them I want to say 13 million. But that
Mhm.
sounds like the right number. I'm not sure. Maybe 14, maybe 12, but somewhere in that range.
Mhm.
Tax abatement for that. To put that in perspective, the entirety of the business personal property tax we were talking about earlier, it was $65 million in 2017. I don't know what that number is today, but 12 or $13 million on one project, that's a big chunk of that we
Mhm.
just gave away. No one asked any questions. So does Amazon, a $1 trillion company, need our $14 million? They're going to put it there anyway. They've already got several places here. It's part of their strategic model. It only benefits the real estate broker that put the deal together, because they're able to put that into the profit and selling it and building it into the long-term lease with Amazon. So it doesn't benefit Amazon necessarily. It doesn't benefit the citizens of Fort Wayne. It benefits the people in the know that worked out the deal with IEDC in the first place.
Mhm. And you said they were coming anyways, because I
Yeah.
guess playing devil's advocate is like, well, if that attracts businesses, then that would seem like a good thing. But you're saying these businesses were coming anyways, and
Yeah.
it's kind of like to relate it to my industry. You talked about real estate. Is I'm against when I list a house, I'm against giving a credit for like carpet or anything like that because I tell my clients I'm like you're going to take it and then they're going to negotiate the way they would have anyway. So you're
Right.
saying the same thing where these businesses are coming. If it's a good business, it's a good business with or without a
Right.
tax break, and we're just giving away money that is unnecessary.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you look at we can do away with a tax on equipment that will actually bring productive capital here and make people's hours worth more. If you follow,
Hmm.
the more you put into industrial equipment, you're making their people's time more valuable. You're making them more efficient, being able to upgrade equipment. So you got like a lot of machinery that may um, maybe 15, 20 years old, but because it's depreciated, they're not paying as much tax on it. Maybe they don't want to make the investment. But if you were to eliminate the tax, then they can bring that in, make people's time worth more. They get paid more. So that's part of that idea. But as far as like that general idea, that's not just me hypothesizing on it. There was an economist at George Mason University that looked at this back in 2015, and I think they updated it in 2019 nationwide. They looked at a variety of these types of real estate um, incentives, tax incentives, and they saw that 90% of the time it made zero difference whether or not they gave it or not. And there was usually, a group of people that were in that business that it benefited. So here, there's a whole cottage industry of people that bring abatements to council. So you get attorneys and lots, there's lots of paperwork that has to be filed,
Hmm.
and that's a pretty lucrative business.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of people that it's in their best interest that we keep doing it because this paperwork has to be filed somewhere, but it doesn't necessarily benefit the taxpayer.
Okay. That's well said. Okay. And then so what's an issue that you think is important that doesn't get a lot of attention? Maybe it's not the sexy thing to talk about, but it's something you'd want to make happen or at least start bringing awareness to.
Yeah. So public safety has to be a number one job for any municipality, Fort Wayne included. We've seen a change in the city over the years. I think it's a nationwide trend, but lately you're seeing an uptick in national statistics related to violent crime. And I think one of the things that we should be doing is looking at ways that we could improve community-based policing. I know that's a term that gets thrown around a lot, but um, unfortunately, I think what we've seen has been a lot of investment in technology and those types of things, as opposed to at the end of the day, sometimes it just takes more, people.
Yeah.
And one of the things I would like to do to be able to maybe facilitate that is a little less investment in drones and SWAT team equipment, that sort of stuff, but instead maybe go to two-man police cars. So that way, each time we hire a new patrolman, we don't have to invest in a whole another car. It also helps with officer morale. If you're first on the scene and you're by yourself, you're most likely going to want to wait for backup. If you got somebody there in the car with you, it's going to help give you a little bit more, maybe encourage you to move forward, and also do that in a more calm way. If
Hmm.
you're having to respond to something by yourself, you might be a little bit nervous and
Hmm.
may not be as easy to de-escalate than if you had someone there with you at that time. And I've talked to multiple officers that had been on the force, 25 years ago, and that's the way it used to be. They used to have two-man police cars, and then that way, if they saw something they thought was, "Hey, that's a little curious, let's check it out," you're more likely to do that if you've already got somebody there with you. But if you had to call it in for backup, and it's may or may not be something, you may just, keep driving
Just to
along.
not be
Yeah,
wasteful or, go through all
yeah,
that,
and
jump through the hoops. If you can just check it out right there on the spot, then
right,
okay.
and so, I'm not a police officer. I've never, I've gone on a ride along, but I've never done actual police work. This idea comes from hours of talking to people that are on the department and some of the stuff that they see on a day in day out basis. And it's not a real sexy thing, and
Hmm.
we're getting into a lot of minutia and weeds with it. But I think it is worth the focus on making sure we're doing policing right.
No, that was a good answer. I mean, it is something that don't know if I've ever even heard anyone talk about. And if I'm hearing you correctly, it's not because Fort Wayne's so dangerous. You're saying like let's keep it as one of the safest places to be and try to stay ahead of the curve and not wait till we have a big problem.
Absolutely, and that's what I tell people about Fort Wayne. We have a safe, affordable place to live. Um, you had mentioned earlier you were in Florida. I was
Hmm.
living in North Carolina before I moved back, moved here. You know, where we were, it was a lot more expensive, and it was not nearly as safe a place for my kids. Those are the things that brought me to Fort Wayne. It's a beautiful place. There's lots of amenities. We got great parks here. It's a wonderful city, and it's affordable, but we also feel safe. And if we allow ourselves to get distracted by, the long pass as opposed to blocking and tackling and doing the basics that need to be done to keep a city safe and affordable, then I look at places that have done that in the past. They used to call Detroit the what was it, the Paris of the Midwest, because they had invested a lot of money in fancy buildings and stuff like that. And then they went through an economic downturn, and it's just been in a slide ever since. I think recently it's starting to improve a little bit, but they hit a real bottom back in 2009, 2010. And we don't want to see Fort Wayne get into a position where we're constantly seeing crime uptick, people moving out of the city, moving into the suburbs. And we've seen a lot of that. You know, in your business, when you're showing people homes, they're probably saying, "Hey, I'd like to see a home that's in either Southwest Allen County schools, or I
Mhm.
want to see a school or a house that's in Northwest Allen County schools, or
Mhm.
or in Leo or something like that." Um, and part of that, I think that's parents' natural reaction is they want to keep their kids safe. And we've seen a lot of the building. If you look at a heat map, and I've seen this heat map of where all the housing permits have been issued in Allen County over the last 10 years, almost all of them are either in Boyd Township or Perry, Cedar Creek, you know, the kind of
Mhm.
the North Rim
Yeah.
or Southwest. I mean, you've seen in more recent years, you've seen some even as far as Lafayette because the Boyd's getting crowded.
Mhm.
Um, you're not seeing that in the city. And I think some of that is, you know, demographic changes. Some of it's where is the supply being built. I think there's some of those questions, but there's been such a focus on building subsidized housing units or building apartment buildings and that sort of thing in the downtown core that we haven't really looked at. What do we need to do to revitalize aging neighborhoods? Um, you know, there are a lot of things in our city ordinances and county codes that we need to work on to make it easier for people to put in new row house developments. Um, when we lived in Chicago, we lived in a walk up in Lincoln Park, and you know it was row houses, but these are very expensive row
Mhm.
houses. I mean, I don't know if you've ever taken a look at like what those things go for
Oh,
these
yeah.
days.
Yeah, I had my buddy bought one, and I was blown away. I was
Yeah,
like, "Whoa!" And he's sharing walls. I'm like,
yeah.
"Man, it made me appreciative of what I have,
Yeah.
honestly."
But you know, there is a market for that sort of thing. There are
Sure.
people that want a more urban setting that would like to be in a place where, hey, I come home from work, I pull in the alleyway, park in the back, I walk down the street to the local eatery, meet my wife there, boom. There's people that want that kind of lifestyle as opposed to having to, you know, drive to everything that they do. And right now, we do have a housing stock that has some of those amenities, but it's older and some of it probably needs to be replaced. There's areas that they could use some reinvestment, and but instead of doing those sort of things, it seems like we've been focused on building, you know, multi-tenant, massive buildings as opposed to allowing developers the freedom to be able to, you know, see if is there a market for more urban, single family, connected housing.
Okay, and what's specifically holding that up? I mean, is there some type of regulation or something like that? Because I saw that was very common in Orlando, where they would take down a whole block and then do basically townhomes, real homes type of thing, and they were selling so fast
Yeah.
because they are more affordable. They're buying the materials in bulk, so then you can build them for cheaper and therefore sell them for cheaper,
Mhm.
and they were really really popular. So, is what specifically is preventing that?
Some of it is we do have lot line restrictions. So a lot of the zoning for single family homes have lot line restrictions that don't allow the structure to be so close to the
I
lot
gotcha.
line. So if we could look at maybe doing additional rezoning to urban core zonings, this is going to take some thought and
Sure,
mapping it
sure.
out, and it's going to take a cooperative effort.
Yeah.
I'm you know, I'm no magician. I can't just wave a wand and make it happen, but it'd be something that we would get together and say, hey, and bring in developers and say, what are the things that you would like to see in order to be able to do these kinds of developments? Because you're right, there are a lot of economies of scale, and the sewers are already in, the streets are already in. There's a lot of, you know, benefits to being
Mhm.
able to do those types of things if you could do it in an economical way. But the way the lot lines are, and knowing what kind of housing people want today, um, heck, a lot of the houses that exist today, um, if they were to burn down, they can't be rebuilt
Mhm.
because they wouldn't be in compliance with all of our ordinances.
Mhm.
So that's one of those things that I think we could take a look at and say, what ordinances can we ease or eliminate or change the zoning for a little bit more dense.
I gotcha. So, and then I feel like that kind of stays true to your message of like you're not spending any money aside from like somebody's time who's employed there, but that's not a tax abatement. That's not a big investment. You're saying we can spur growth just by simply changing some of the regulation on that.
Yeah, and I think if you were to do something like that, you could probably partner with chains like I don't know if I should mention company names or not, but like, you know, like a small international, you know, small footprint international grocery store chain that we
Hmm.
see popping up all over the you know, we have one on Illinois Road.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, they have lots of places in Chicago where they, you know, they'll take a corner in a neighborhood like that, where you have row houses all the way up to, then you have like a little grocery there at the corner.
Hmm.
Maybe on the other corner you have a restaurant, or some sort of entertainment type thing. Um, there's a lot of people that want that kind of lifestyle. They move to big cities to get it. There are maybe people willing to invest in that here.
Okay.
I'm not sure that I would put taxpayer money in it. It's a gamble. I don't think it's right for the taxpayer to be supporting bureaucrats playing monopoly.
Sure, but you're still saying you can facilitate it without spending money. If the demand is there, you can make it easier
Right.
to happen. Okay. So I do want to transition a little bit. We've talked extensively about a lot of the downtown developments. We've talked about Electric Works. We've talked about, I think most recently, talked about the Pepsi building. Um, and I think kind of what you said at the start, you are not a fan of the government picking winners and losers. You're not a fan of taking taxpayer money from people who may live way out northeast and have no intention of going downtown and basically forcing them to invest. And we've gone back and forth on some of those counterpoints. I don't want to really rehash all that. I'd encourage anybody who's listening to go back and listen to those because you articulated your point very well. However, now that we're here,
Mhm.
Electric Works is underway. Union Street, I've been down there. It was great. I loved it. Um, if you were elected mayor, what would be your plans? I mean, with all these projects that are basically already happening, how would you see yourself, whether it's Electric Works or, Riverfront phases 2 and 3, which aren't built out yet? What would be your goals or what type of influence would you have with those projects?
To the extent that we already have contracts in which the city is on the hook for doing things, we have a legal obligation to complete those contracts. I can't stop funding something that we already contractually said that we're going to fund. We would be sued. We'd lose that case. We'd end up paying for it anyway, probably more. So there's no point in trying to stop what's already been done. What I could say is that, instead of doing more of that in those areas, there's things that we can do that would be just for everybody. Um, that could supplement those without um, favoring one developer or another developer. For instance, there's plenty of brownfield remediation money available from the federal government in which we could take the east side of the Electric Works area, remove that building, remediate the ground, and put in a nice park. Having lived in Chicago for 3 years, the only reason that Chicago is a livable city is because they do have beautiful parks. We lived in Lincoln Park. We could walk to the park. It was a place to get away from all the hustle and bustle of the urban core. Um, in that area, that's a nice large area in which you could put in some very nice parks, flowers, maybe a soccer field or something like that of that sort, um, to encourage families moving in the area. They could live in dense housing and still have a nice green place for the kids to go and play. Um, we could do those types of things. Um, Without having to incur additional projects like this. We could still, continue to make those areas better, but make them better for everyone and not just one or two developers.
Okay. All right. And then, so what's something else? I mean, we've talked about, the police issue. We've talked about, trying to stimulate growth. We talked about the developments. Is there any other items on your platform or any other goals you'd have coming into office?
Yeah. So one of the things that I want to make this campaign about is giving people the sense of empowerment and feeling that they can do things in their own community. So trying to reestablish and put together neighborhood associations where neighbors know one another. If you look at some of the crime statistics, places where people know their neighbors are less likely to have a lot of crime than places that don't know their neighbors. So trying to put together um, ways to encourage that. The current administration has done some of that. I'd like to do more of that. And maybe even using some of the legacy funds or something like that to help establish neighborhood, because a lot of these places the bylaws and everything have gone away. And I know that sounds kind of crazy from someone that maybe more of a libertarian, but I do think a sense of community is very important. And where you have folks that are disconnected and people don't know who their neighbors are, you're a lot more likely to have things going on, criminal activity that maybe you don't want to see.
It seems very holistic. I mean, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're wanting two officers patrolling, connecting with the neighborhood. You're wanting people to have, walkable options, and then them kind of making the decisions for themselves in their own. That way, someone on southeast side of town isn't having to do something that someone out northwest decided.
Right.
Is that what you're saying? So,
Yeah. So I don't know if you remember this, but back in I think it was 2017, I put forward a ordinance change that would allow people to have chickens in their backyards. So Fort Wayne's one of the few cities where you're not allowed to have chickens. In Indianapolis, you can have 12 chickens. In Chicago, you can have chickens. Valparaiso, I think it's five. Even New York City, you can have chickens, and some of the boroughs, I think Brooklyn and the Bronx both allow you to have chickens. Um, I had a lot of people reach out to me and say, "Hey, we would really like to be able to have a couple of chickens," and as part of this, um, feeling that they're living a sustainable lifestyle.
hmm
That they have a garden plot in their backyard and they'd like to have a protein source,
especially
eggs.
now. I mean,
Yeah,
especially right now. I honestly, and sorry to interrupt you. That comes up all the time actually with clients with me. Like it was something in Florida I never dealt with, and here I have people, and it's actually kind of a problem because there's a few sections in the city that you can, but it's pretty far out. But other than that, you're pretty much going out of city limits, and it makes it more difficult for people who want that and don't want to live out in the country.
yeah. One of the complaints I had when I was doing that was people saying, "Well, we don't want chickens in our neighborhood," and that's why I said we need to empower neighborhood associations so then that way they can you and your neighbors could hash out how can we make this work as
Mhm.
opposed to having your city government dictate one set of rules for everybody. Maybe in some neighborhoods they would, hey, we'd love to have a community garden plot and some chickens and that sort of thing. Maybe in some neighborhoods, I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure my neighbors would go for it if I decided I wanted to put chickens in my backyard. But but getting the city out of the way where that way neighbors, you've got in my neighborhood we got 41 houses. Those 41 people can get those 41 families, I should say, could get together and decide, hey, what kind of rules do we want to put on this sort of thing? Do we want to have them or not? And they can decide, as opposed to a group of nine councilmen and a mayor and their staff saying for all 250,000 residents of Fort Wayne, hey, this is one set of rules. Um, this way, each neighborhood can decide what's best for them.
Yeah, it's kind of like what I mean. I think regardless of what side or on the aisle you're on, I think we can all agree that we don't like someone in Washington making decisions for us, because they're so disconnected. They're not living our lifestyle. And I feel like that's just like kind of drilling down on that same topic of like, you don't want to be making decisions for other people. You want to you want to empower them to do it.
Right.
So,
Someone that lives at, say, the corner of Pontiac and Calhoun has different expectations for what their neighborhood looks like, what kind of things they'd like to be able to do in their neighborhood than say somebody out where I live at Amber and Liberty Mills. That people have different ideas of what they want their community to be like, and they ought to be able to decide even at that hyper local level. You know, how do we want things to look like? And the city ought to be helping encourage those types of things as opposed to saying, hey, we're going to have this lot lines have to be this big, square footage of a house has to be this big. There's a lot of stuff that we kind of set rules that may not work for everybody.
I love it. All right. Well, just kind of wrapping up, how can people learn more about you? How can they support your campaign? Where can they connect with you?
You can go to ARP4, the number four, numeral four, for mayor. .com and is jasonarp.com as well. I do have a Facebook page. Facebook has been really funny. So once you get the blue check on there, so like for my city council page, there's a whole process. You got to send in IDs, a copy of your city certificate saying you're actually a city councilman and all that kind of stuff. But once you've done that, converting that to a candidate for mayor was almost impossible. So I ended up having to make a new ARP for Mayor Facebook page. It's up. There's only, I don't know, there's less than 200 people on it now, which is, it's kind of funny because I had, well over 1,000 for my district city council one,
Yeah.
but trying to transfer those over has been kind of a nightmare. So if people want to go look there, I'll have updates. But yeah, so at arp4mayor.com, there's a subscribe there if you'd like to get emails, kind of get updates on the campaign. And at jasonarp.com, I've had that for a long time. And I keep a repository of a lot of the articles and essays that I've written over the years. There's over 35 articles, I believe, that are on there at jasonarp.com/blog. So if people want to read,
I read a few of them before. They were
yeah,
good. There's some good points in there. It got me to thinking.
some of them are kind of verbose.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, Jason, this is our third talk, like we said, and every time what stands out to me is how much you care about the city, to the point where you're willing to have some maybe unpopular opinions, but it's in the best interest of people. So I really appreciate that. If you guys want to learn more, please connect with Jason, support his campaign, and be on the lookout for more content from him.
Great. Thanks, Jake.
Yeah.